Well, welcome everybody to the latest edition of Ed Talks. I don't know where you are when you're listening to this, maybe in your car, on the tube or whatever it is, but it's a lovely day where I am. So in good spirits, and I'm joined today by Jonathan Hopper, who for a number of you may well know him as being a representative face of the buying side of the industry. But he heads up Garrington with connections to Phil Spencer, various other industry bigwigs, and I have sat with Jonathan on the board of the Property Ombudsman and now on the Industry Forum for many years, and we've never really had an opportunity to shoot the breeze like this. And bearing in mind that I spent 40 years on the selling side of the industry, Jonathan, you've spent how many years on the buying side?
15 on the buying side and 27 in the trenches overall.
You genuinely don't look old enough, but that's another story.
There's a story behind that, but I suspect we'll come on to it.
Yes, you've managed to keep hold of your hair and keep it a better colour, better than I have. Now, I clearly both of us have been around the block a few times, but buying agency is one of those sort of things that when people hear about it, well, actually, we were talking off air, just characterise, if you could, the way you think, because I think if anybody's been reading the press recently, there's been an awful lot more info about or talk about buying agents and what they do. When I started in this industry in the 1970s, 80s, sort of most estate agents were buying agents, really. I used to do about a third of my business on a retained basis. People would retain me as an estate agent to go and buy something for them and pay me a fee. That seemed to die a long time ago. So characterise, if you could, a little bit what buying agents do and where you think the problems lie and where the future might lie.
There's a lot of questions in one go. So I think there's the buying agency side of the market really has been in existence for the last sort of 20, 25 years in a meaningful way. It was blurred before that, as you say, with some sales agents getting into the buying side on particular assignments for particular clients. And equally, the corporate relocation market had CEOs being moved across the pond and then needed to buy rather than rent something. So there was always an existence, but there's sort of the early roots. The nature of the service and the clientele that will entertain paying fees has historically been geared far more towards the top end of the marketplace. As we both know, the dynamics of that market is a lot more discretion in that and privacy in that world. There's a lot of things that happen off market, which is sort of the gold standard for buying agency. But it has changed, and it's changed quite a lot in a short period of time. And there is more mainstream awareness and mainstream adoption of buying agency, both from a consumer level, but also from an industry level. I think at an industry level, we've seen buying agency was always in existence in London and other parts of the UK, but it really has spread from top to toe now. And a lot of estate agents have got their head around the fact that actually a buying agent is not to be concerned by, but actually brings freshly qualified, ready to go buyers where they're being guided and advised, and the chances of things going through are proportionally that much more than something going wrong. So it has changed a lot in nature. The pandemic's then brought it into sharp focus, and our particular sector has had the spotlight shined on it quite a bit by the press as to is this the way that you need to buy a property? And I think it's not just the dynamics of the market that we've got at the moment. A buying agent absolutely helps. It's a form of license queue jumping to get to the front of that queue and get ahead of the market to see what's fully available both on and off market. But I think also it's one of, there's a lot of people seeking wise counsel. And as much as there are some fantastic sales agents in the market, ultimately they're being paid by the seller to look after their best interests. There's a lot of people moving to new locations that they've never lived in before, seeking a new way of life, really unsure about values, really unsure about the good and the better parts of an area, and wanting somebody objective to guide and advise them. So it's been a busy time in the buying side of things.
Yes, I've always thought there's been a bit of dichotomy really because certainly as negotiators, people who are actually out on the street showing people around houses and trying to negotiate deals and get offers, of course most negotiators end up forming relationships with their buyers because they themselves don't spend a lot of time talking to sellers. So I think that has grown up in the industry, perhaps a wrong characterization of negotiators as being on the side of buyers. That's how buyers often feel. They ring up their estate agent and they forget that they are being paid by the seller. Give us some idea of what sort of fees, certainly historically. We'll come on to any changes in services that look like they're coming down the line in answer to some of these requirements. But give me some idea of what sort of fees as a buyer you might expect to pay a buying agent.
The landscape at the moment looks anywhere between 1% and 3%. There's typically a retaining fee of 1,000 to 3,000 plus VAT up front. Some will deduct that later off a success fee, some won't. And then it's within that sort of range. And that tends to be skewed a little bit by depth of experience, pedigree of the firm, track record. There's a lot of new entrants that we've seen it in the sales agency for many years. The first thing that they do is try and undercut the competition and come in and sell themselves arguably a little bit short. And equally, there are some very high-end firms that charge very high-end fees. But in that sort of range is where it normally falls.
Okay, and there's certainly been an explosion in the numbers, but give us some idea of how many buying agents there are out there. I know that you represent an organisation, so it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that as well, your professional organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking at data, and the touch points for this is difficult because there's a lot of buying agents that do fly under the radar, some deliberately, some blissfully unaware of their responsibilities to be registered with things like TPO, with the Ombudsman. But if you used Ombudsman membership, for example, there has been quite an explosion of membership within that sector. And it's believed to be around the 1,200 mark as we speak today, somewhere around that sort of level. And if you go back 5 years, that number was less than 800. So proportionally, as a percentage, it's probably one of the fastest growing sectors of the residential market as a percentage. And there has been a lot of people jump into it, particularly over the last couple of years, because of the dynamics of the market we see. And I think also aware that you can go into that in a lighter infrastructure way than you can from a sales agency point of view. You don't necessarily need the marketing and all, and whether you're going offices or not is a different discussion, but it's different in nature.
Yeah, I can't help feeling that's probably a bit of an underestimate. I mean, if you think about how many people are in the market in general, certainly on the estate agency side, 30, 40,000, probably that sort of figure, to think there are only 1,200 or so buying agents. I mean, certainly if you work in London, there's a buying agent around every corner, but that's, and I think a lot of them, I was talking to a very well-known one this morning, actually, who was telling me that a lot of the people who came into the market just before the pandemic and during the pandemic, clearly are people who probably had decided that a estate agency wasn't for them, which normally means they weren't being hugely successful on the sell side and had decided they want to go and try something else, tried the buying side and discovered that it's not for them because there's quite a lot of hard work involved in it. I mean, I'm not surprised there are some intakes of breath. I know in the old days when I used to turn around to someone and say it'll cost you 1% as a buyer, they don't often get that, a lot of people. But what I understood and the way I used to sell it was that if you've got two people trying to buy a property, and one of them, if I as a selling agent have two people who are bidding on a property and one is represented by a buying agent, that buying agent is relatively well known in the market, you can, I think, attribute a certain amount of seriousness to that, because the person that's making the bid is prepared to pay the person not only to act for them and be their mouthpiece, but also that, they're paying them money. They're paying them, with the average buy price pushing up towards £300,000 now. Anywhere between 3 and 9 grand is a lot of money. So I always gave credence to people who had somebody acting for them. Apart from anything else, it's a lot easier often to deal with a buying agent who knows the ins and outs of the way the property market works, which is a nightmare. We probably won't have time to get onto that in terms of our TPO.
A very long episode.
Property, yeah, we can do that another one. We can do that for people when they're on their way home rather than on their way to work. But I mean, if you think about the fact that certainly the press of late has been that if you want, and this is not talking about the top end of the market, this is talking about more generalised levels of the market. If you want to have someone acting for you and helping you out, what has been your response to the, how can I put this, maybe a menu-based choice of how you use a buying agent, because I'm sure some people want to have a buying agent negotiating for them, but they don't want to pay the rest of the fees for the other stuff that goes with it. They might have found or identified a property and they want to be able to say, I want, how can you go about that? Do you have some plans for that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a growing need for it within the marketplace, and there's a lot of information available to purchasers that simply just wasn't there 5 years ago, but certainly sort of 10 years ago. Equally, the awareness, as I touched on earlier, at a price point in the market, there is a general wider awareness and adoption and interest in the service, but fee for some buyers is a real objection and a concern. And there are elements where actually they're very comfortable going out and looking at property themselves. They want to go and do the viewings, but for example, hitting yourself against a professional negotiator that does it every day of the week, there's quite a few buyers that just aren't comfortable with that and want to be professionally represented. So there are elements of the service. The nature of buying agency historically, though, has been an overarching, all-encompassing relationship, going on a journey. It starts with a discussion that goes way beyond applicant qualification in a estate agency world. We're talking about what's the dream, the lifestyle, and the real nuances of what somebody wants to achieve, and then taking them on that journey and seeing everything with them and gauging all of that feedback enables a good buying agent to reach the point where they'll know before the client's seen the property that they're going to buy it. Stripping out layers of that is tricky, but not impossible. And I think we will see within the next 12 months elements of that starting to come into the industry in a more mainstream way. My firm's looking at that. I know other firms are looking at it at the moment, and I do expect the landscape to change. But equally, the market probably is going to change around us at the same time. So it's aligning those stars.
Yeah, I mean, that's partly where we started talking about this conversation, was around your business, Garrington, and my business, Vuber, in terms of the opening up or how prop tech can change. I mean, these days, the ability to have someone go around and do a WhatsApp call on their phone and show you around it so you don't actually need to travel to go and see it. That's got to change the way things work. So from a buying perspective, I mean, certainly one of the biggest areas we have found has been people coming over from Hong Kong. I mean, with whatever it is, 300,000 people being given passports in Hong Kong and told to come over here, there's going to be an enormous influx, and we get a huge amount of business from people in Hong Kong wanting us to go and do video reports on properties before they go and look at them, or before they send someone round to go and look at them. So it's clearly an area where there is an enormous amount of potential. I'd like to bring you back to one thing you touched on earlier, which was membership of TPO and that sort of thing, and people flying under the radar. I mean, Clearly buying agents do perform estate agency services, and therefore they do need to be registered for anti-money laundering, for property ombudsman or some form of redress. Is that a problem? Because I think your how would you describe it? Your organisation, your wider organisation that people are members of, does that do all that sort of thing for them? Is that the whole point of it?
Yeah, there is. So in terms of from a guarantee point of view, absolutely. We make sure that everything is in place that should be in place. In a wider industry point of view, I've seen the sort of growth go hockey stick over the last 5 years. But with that comes challenges, and you've got, as with any industry, you've got great operators who take their professional standards very seriously, and then you've got others that will do the bare minimum, and you've got others, as I mentioned, that are flying under the radar. I think that the key point is such an intimate relationship you have with your client as their buying advisor, as their trusted advisor, that you owe it to them and yourself and your business to make sure that everything is as it should be, and you are aware of your requirements for mandatory compliance. So I think there needs to be more noise on this industry-wise. There's a lot of people that have dived in thinking, well, I've done sales and I'll just do buying now, but that doesn't surely apply to me. I don't need this, that, the other. In the eyes of the law, as you say, it's covered by the Estate Agents Act, and you need all the things that a sales agent has in place. There's a specific code of conduct for buying agents at TPO. You've got to have your AML in place. And then professional associations, I work with Property Mark at the moment and looking at the buying agency side of things there, because there is absolute growing awareness that they figure large within the market now. and we want to safeguard the reputation of professional buying agents and the value they bring to clients. But to do that, it needs to be done on a level playing field where everyone is playing by the same rules.
So if someone wants to come to you and say, what should I check? If they were thinking of employing a buying agent, what can they do to check that that buying agent is above board? I mean, word of mouth is obviously great. Someone who's got experience can point to that. But beyond that, what would you say they should do?
So if you're looking for professional credentials beyond personality and reputation, then I think the starting point would be, are they a membership of a redress scheme? There's 3 ways that can happen really in the UK: Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the Property Redress Scheme, PRS, and sort of the gold standard Property Ombudsman. All of those have got search facilities to check by company or operator's name and postcode. And if they're a member, that should come up. That actually probably suffice for a lot of what the average consumer needs, because to get membership, you've got to then demonstrate that you've got professional indemnity insurance in place. You've got to demonstrate that you've registered for anti-money laundering regulations with HMRC. So to get those things, the other things are there in a bit of a catch net from an industry point of view. So from a consumer point of view, I would always start with, is the person you're thinking of working with subscribed with a property redress scheme? And if they are, then you're pretty safe moving forwards. If you want to go really deep, then obviously you can look at all of the things I've just mentioned, but then I would take it a stage further and also look for client references and the ability to talk to somebody that's used that particular buying agent and get their experience firsthand. And we offer that to all of our clients. It's taken up occasionally, but it just gives that extra level of comfort because not everyone's used a buying agent before.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is that if a buying agent's got experience in the market, they're going to be able to recommend all the people you need for the service. So probably solicitors, surveyors, this sort of thing are going to be much more on the buyer's side. I mean, so often people will go to an estate agent and the estate agent will recommend a solicitor or a financial provider or whatever it is. And more often than not, they'll be getting some kind of kickback from them. That's kickback is a mean word, actually, some sort of a referral fee. But again, people have got to remember, and it is really important to remember, that a seller is being paid, an estate agent is being paid by the seller. When they say client, it's all too often obfuscated. People will say, "Oh, I'm meeting my client tomorrow to show them around the property." Well, that's not their client. That's their applicant, their buyer. They're not paying them. So the buying agent. I mean, you're still active. How would you describe your day to day? Do you still act personally for buyers, or are you now far too important and tell other people what to do, Jonathan?
Never far too important. A lot of what I do is working on the business and growing it. But that's changed more in the last few years purely because of scale, size, and reacting to the opportunity that has presented itself. That said, there are clients I've personally acted for on a number of occasions where I do get involved and will continue to do so because it's a personal relationship built on trust. There's one family that I've helped 3 members of that family from different generations. And there's many a client that will have an additional requirement. So I do get involved, but the size of the business now, we're operating from the Highlands down to Cornwall and everywhere between. My primary focus and loyalty is to the team of great people we have, raising professional standards, bringing innovation and technology into the business, and keeping a nice, healthy amount of daylight between us and the competition.
Yeah, well, that's always important. And trust, as you say, is such an important part. It's very difficult to quantify that trust, but return or repeat business is incredibly important. I still get people, even though I've been out of the market for 6 years, who ring me up on my mobile number asking me to do stuff for them who I haven't seen for sort of 15 years, but they say, "No, Ed, I only want you to do it," which is
tricky,
very,
isn't it?
Which is, yeah, well, most of the time I can help in some way or another. I think most people will either be arriving home or getting off their train, so they've probably had enough time to listen to you and I talking a bit about the buying industry, and I really hope people have learned a little bit. I mentioned at the beginning that is Phil Spencer still involved with Garrington? I mean, is he still part of an advising? How is his input?
His input is legacy.
Okay.
Phil founded the business 25 years ago before he became famous on TV, and laid all the foundations, and then yours truly led a buyout in 2008 to the shock and horror of many people in the middle of a property downturn and global recession.
Well, that's the Warren Buffett rule, isn't it? You buy when everyone else is selling.
They were running for the doors. I think I've got the Evening Standard from the day that I signed on the line with the solicitors, which was worst recession in living memory.
Yeah, well, we're both old enough to have lived through a few of those, and we've got plenty of potential black swan events going on in the world at the moment, that's for sure.
Indeed.
And I can't think of a better way, if you're trying to spend what is likely to be the biggest investment you'll ever make, than having someone on your side. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking of buying and you haven't heard of the option of having a buying agent, then do at least consider it. I mean, Jonathan certainly would be a good port of call for you if that's what you were doing. And I do look forward to working with you. I mean, certainly the buy side is has been brought sharply into focus by the press and COVID and all this sort of thing. There's been a lot of attention drawn to it. And I don't think there are many better advocates for it than you, Jonathan. So I'm really delighted to have given you a chance. Is there anything you'd like to add that you think we haven't spoken about that you feel would be important to communicate?
I think from an industry point of view, and those that are working within in the industry listening to this, I think we're at a very interesting stage where we're either going to go a little bit US in nature, where actually you'll see property advisors acting for buyers and sellers. We just touched on a minute ago that we've got clients that will call us back and say, can you help me with this? But actually, if you're a two-legged stool, that doesn't sit too well, and you may want some advice for something that you don't normally do. So will we see the more rounded property advisor, and actually they're there to serve the client with any requirement? Or are we going to see industry dig its heels in, and actually buying agents should never get involved in sales agents are sales agents and should never get involved in the buying side? It will be interesting to see whether we'll see those two sort of cross-pollinate more, or whether we're going to see quite a segmented sectors in the market. But I think we're at the tipping point right now, and I think the next 24 months are going to be very interesting to see where the industry is going to go next on it.
Yeah, it will be fascinating. I agree. It's at a bit of a tipping point, and certainly we're seeing a rapid growth of the overarching brands and people working underneath them in specific areas, and sort of franchise models and this sort of thing, which is much more commonplace in the States. I still think we have a major difference between us and the States, which are fees being the principal issue, that people in the States can afford to run better operations, whereas here people are used to getting this is going to sound really rude. They're used to paying peanuts and getting monkeys. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think there are lots of very good people in the industry, but if you want something good, you've got to pay for it. You're not going to get it on the cheap. And I think that's a lesson that the Brits in particular are finding much more difficult to learn, whereas the Americans are used to paying for good service. And therefore the people who deliver it have to deliver a good service, or they don't, it doesn't work. And I think there's still, I mean, you and I, as I said, have sat on the Property Ombudsman Board and the Industry Forum now for a very long time. So we get to see some of the worst examples. And to be fair, they're few and far between, the really bad examples that actually get through to redress schemes.
Absolutely.
But in general terms, our industry is still not massively well thought of, and we need to continue to work towards that. Well, look, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
As you say, maybe the whole issue of redress and that sort of thing may become more important, and we can return to that another time. But in the meantime, thank you very much. If people do want to get a hold of you, having heard this, where would they need to go?
If from a property finding point of view, head over to garrington.co.uk. And from an industry point of view, I'm on LinkedIn and the usual social media channels. You'll find me there. Feel free to get in touch.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ed.